English teacher is going to be looking more specifically for things like, do you have a hook? Do you have a thesis? Do you have a very clear topic sentence? All of those things will help you in other fields, right? But we're specifically grading on seeing, do you have those things there? And so is a little bit of a difference between an essay exam in English versus an essay exam in another content area class. So let's go ahead and move on, and your handout has a lot of this information so that you can just kind of pay attention and have a reference to look back on. But if I add information, you can go ahead and take notes on that if you want. The questions I'm going to deal with are, why do essay tests and time writing in the first place? What's the purpose? How do you prepare for them? So I want to talk a little bit about, before you even get into the classroom, what should you do to be ready? How do you pace yourself once you're in the class and you're writing? How many of you have run out of time on an essay exam before? Did you run out? So at least one. I'm surprised it was only one. It's not uncommon. I often have students who, I'm pulling their paper away and they're still trying to write on it as I'm pulling it away from them, because it's hard. It's a different way of writing, and you have to learn how to watch the time. I'm a slow writer. Typically, in an out-of-class essay, when I was in college, it would take me 2 hours to write my intro paragraph. Could I do that in an in-class essay? Absolutely not. I had to learn different techniques. Part of it, when you're actually there writing, is making sure you understand the question. So I'm going to ask another question. How many of you have misunderstood a question and done poorly because you wrote as if you were writing for a different question? Has anybody ever done that? You kind of misunderstood the topic? No? Nobody's? Well, that's good. Hopefully that never happens. Usually half of the people go, yeah, I did that. They asked this question, I thought they meant this, and I wrote this wonderful essay that wasn't on topic. Another is, how do you write the essay when you're in the process of writing after you've understood the question? And how do you manage the pressure and the stress so that you don't do poorly just because of stress? So, why? You've all suspected this. Teachers are sadists. We like to create pain. That's why I came into this profession. You knew that, right? We like to create pain. Okay. But there are other reasons. Essay exams assess not just factual knowledge. You can do a really good job through multiple choice objective exams to figure out what you know information-wise. But an essay exam assesses your ability to process the knowledge, to make it your own, to examine the implications of the information that you've learned, and to otherwise think critically about that material from the class. So if you're learning about military history, you may know a lot of information, a lot of facts, but the question is, do you understand the implications of a particular battle, a particular strategy, maybe new technology in the military? How does that affect? What are the implications of that on military history? We want to know about your critical thinking ability, not just the idea that you've read all the material and you remember it. And so essay exams do a great job of doing that. They also require that you work alone. You are independent. You have to reflect your own understanding. It's wonderful that we have the Writing Center, that you can come and meet with tutors and instructors. It's wonderful that you may have friends and family members who will read your papers and give you feedback. But we want to know, to what extent have you made this your own knowledge and your own skill set? So, yes, you had a great thesis statement in your out-of-class essay. Have you, from that, learned how to write a thesis statement on your own? Have you learned how to do transitions on your own? And so it reflects your own understanding of the content, your own abilities as a writer. And that's another reason we do this. Okay. So in terms of preparation, I'm going to break this into academic preparation, but also other kinds of preparation. One really, really important thing is to study ahead of time. If studies have shown that people who are cramming at the last minute actually tend to remember less. They may spend the same amount of time. Okay, if you you stay up all night, you may have spent 8 hours studying. But if you spent that same 8 hours earlier over a period of time, you actually will remember more. So in a sense, it's a more effective and more efficient use of your time to study beforehand, right? Not at the last minute. To do that, you need a study guide. How many of you have had instructors who have given you study guides for exams, whether essay or objective? Okay, so you've had that, and so you've used that study guide, right? Okay. If you don't get a study guide from your instructor, you can create your own. And a really, really good way of doing this, by the way, is getting together with other students from the class if you're able, because different people will catch different things that have been going on during the semester. So one of the things that you can do, whether you're working independently or in a group or with a partner, is to review your class notes. Hopefully you're taking notes. If you're not, take notes, okay? And the readings from the class. Hopefully, as you've been doing your readings, you've highlighted stuff, you've marked things that you think are important from your textbooks and your readings. So you review it, and you don't have to reread everything. You're kind of looking at what you've highlighted. You're skimming through. That helps you do the next thing, which is to develop a list of likely topics, right? What do you think your instructor is going to cover in this exam? And questions that you think the teacher will talk about. Now, some teachers are really, really predictable in a good way. This is not a bad way. They hit certain points in class again and again and again, and you can be certain it's going to be on the exam. Other teachers, one of my favorite teachers in college, was completely unpredictable in terms of, we weren't ever certain, but we would still try to generate questions that we think he might ask on the exam. And I did this in groups, and it was much more effective in a group than individually, but it still works on your own. Once you have your likely topics and questions, try to answer them. Try to explore them. Figure out where there are holes in your knowledge and study. One of the important things this does is not only does it prepare you academically, but it also means you'll be less stressed out when you go into the test. There's nothing like being over-prepared for a test to make a test really not frightening. You go in and you're like, I know this stuff. And this is how you do that. Okay. But academic preparation is not the only thing. Anybody here get really anxious before tests? I occasionally have students who look like they're going to hyperventilate. And occasionally, I've actually taken people out of the classroom and said, breathe, don't pass out on me. I really don't want you to die. It's not worth it. One thing is to get enough rest the night before. Again, that goes back to the not cramming. Rest your mind so that you're sharp, you're able to think clearly. Eat a light meal or snack. The reason I'm saying that is that you don't want to be hungry, you don't want your stomach growling. I'm hypoglycemic, so my blood sugar plummets if I don't eat regularly. So I need to eat before I go into any situation where I'm not going to be able to eat for a while. But you don't want to eat anything really, really heavy that's going to make you feel sick, again, because that can be distracting as well. Go to the bathroom before the test. That seems like another obvious thing, but we forget sometimes, and then you're absolutely distracted by your body. Get to class earlier on time. Who wants to bet that the day that you have an exam is the day that you get stopped by that train that stops and then it starts backing up, right? And you're 20 minutes there. Go early, be prepared, so that you don't have that last minute stress. So that if you get to the classroom and go, oh man, I forgot a Scantron, you have the time to go get the Scantron and come back. You're not losing any test time to that. Have your materials ready. whatever your teacher tells you to bring, get it ready the night before. Bring it, make sure it's with you. Some teachers want Scantrons. There's a Scantron that actually has a mini essay book. Blue books, sometimes teachers will provide the paper themselves. I've done a combination of all three depending on the class. Be ready for the environment. We don't control the temperatures in the rooms. I don't know if you've ever noticed that, but like you can play around and try to make it hotter or colder and it does nothing. They have the controls in the classroom to give us an illusion that we have some input into the temperature of the classroom, but we don't. So come with layers, right? You don't want to shiver while you're taking the test again because your body can be distracting, right? So bring layers. Sometimes it's hot outside and the air conditioning's up really, really high. Sometimes it's cold outside and they've made an inferno in the classroom. You want to be able to take layers off without scandalizing the other students. No nude test taking on campus, it's a rule. I don't know if you look in the guidelines. So you've got to make sure that you can do that. Water, bring water. A lot of instructors won't allow, and you're not really supposed to bring sodas or other things into the classroom, but usually a transparent, water bottle is usually fine. And so, consider bringing things like that. Another one is bring a watch. Where is the clock in this particular room? Back there. So to model, if I'm over here taking the test, and pretend I have a chair, I'm taking the test and I want to know what time it is, I don't have a watch, I have to crane all the way back and look at that clock, and I've lost my momentum. Whereas if I can just do this, or even just put the watch on the desk and look at it every so often, it's not as distracting and it helps me pace myself. Another part of mental preparation is not being anxious. And if you have a tendency towards test anxiety, reminding yourself that this one test will not determine the course of your future life forever. That doesn't mean don't take it seriously, but people have failed tests and still passed classes. They've failed classes and still graduated from college. You don't want to make a habit of it, right? You don't want that to be, but the reality is this is not going to determine your life's course. So breathe a little bit. I've even, as touchy-feely and goofy as this might sound, I've had my students do yoga breathing before. I was taking a yoga class at the time, I asked them what they thought and if they thought it was useful, and they said actually that it helped them stay more focused during the test. And all they did is for 2 minutes before they took the test, they breathed slowly in and out. And they just had their eyes closed and they just breathed. And they started counting. We had counted to 3 and then to 4 and then to 5 just to slow the pace of breath so that you're not anxious, because it really does help keep you focused. Okay. Once you're in the classroom, you've got to watch the time. So first of all, you need to know how much time you have. And usually your teacher will tell you, but if you're not sure, you just ask. And to give an example, I'm going to take this pen, I'll write over here. Let's say you might have part objective, part essay, you might have all essay, but maybe you have 60 minutes, okay? We'll take that as an example. And you have 60 minutes just for the essay. You need to budget time for pre-writing, for writing, and proofreading. So that's kind of 3 categories. And the pre-writing includes reading the question carefully and maybe writing a scratch outline. The writing is what you want to spend the most time doing, obviously. But you also want that time to edit. Make sure that it's clean, that you've fixed any major glaring errors that you can find. So with pre-writing, what range of time would you suggest? 5 to 10 minutes, yeah. That's usually what I tell people. I would say take at least, around 5 minutes. Make sure you really know what you want to talk about because it actually saves time here. If you have done a really nice scratch outline, it keeps you focused and organized and so that you don't lose track of what you're trying to say at this point. Editing, I'm going to say, give yourself about the same amount of time. Okay, so 5 to 10 minutes. Because at the end, we tend to go over what we intend to, right? We think we're going to save 10 minutes and it ends up being 5. I would aim for 10 simply because you'll probably get 5. Okay. And so if we have 10 minutes here and 10 minutes here, how much time do you have to write? 40 minutes, yeah. And let's say you're writing a 5-paragraph essay. It may not be 5. It could be 4 paragraphs. It could be 6. It could be 7, however many paragraphs. But let's say in your scratch outline, you had your thesis, and then you had point 1, 2, and 3, and then you need your intro and your conclusion. You're going to have 5 paragraphs. How much time do you have to write each paragraph? Around 8 minutes, yeah. So now you don't have to be absolutely precise. Not every paragraph is going to take the same amount of time. The intro might take a little bit more. In fact, the conclusion might take the least amount of time. But what you want to do is if you go, I have about 8 minutes for each paragraph, maybe 10 minutes, when you're writing, watch the time. If 5 minutes have gone by and you're still pre-writing, it's okay. If 10 minutes have gone by, you're still pre-writing, stop and just start writing your essay. Right? Whatever pre-writing you've done, that's got to be enough. You've got to start writing. You've written your intro. It's taken 10 minutes. Stop. Start moving on. Right? If you see that 10 minutes have gone by, you know you need to move. You've written another paragraph. Maybe 8 minutes have gone by. You realize you need to start wrapping it up. You need to start going on to the next paragraph. You need to start going on to the next paragraph. That little outlining is going to help you watch your time as well, because it tells you how much time you have for each section of the paper. Again, this is fluid. Don't take this as a rigid rule, because you may have one paragraph that takes longer than the others, but you don't want to have so long on one paragraph that you don't finish the essay, right? That you don't write the conclusion. You want to make sure that you have time for that and time at the end. Any questions so far? Okay. So we already kind of went over this. I wanted us to think about it. So let's talk about reading the questions, because I do think, from my own experience of reading student essays, that often this is the area where students get really tripped up. And you can write a beautiful essay that's off topic, and that's a very hard thing to grade as an instructor. Because if you didn't read the assignment correctly, well, are they able to do what I really asked them to do? I don't know. They're able to do this other thing wonderfully, right? But I'm looking for their ability to do this, and I don't see it. That's a challenging thing. So you want to make sure you read the questions well. I like, as a method, this is not the only method, is to analyze the question by breaking it down into topics, what you're writing about, and tasks. And the tasks are what you're supposed to do. So I'm going to give some examples. Let's start off with tasks. So if you look, what I have on the slide is also in your handout. You can summarize or analyze. What's summarizing? How about somebody on this side of the room? If somebody asks you to summarize on a test, what are you supposed to do? The pressure's on this side of the room.
The main ideas of what you're reading?
Yes, the main ideas of the reading. Whose words are you using? Your own words. Are you giving your opinion at that point, though?
No.
No. Good. So main ideas of the author in your own words. Analyzing is more like dissecting, picking apart. If you've ever dissected a frog, that's kind of what analyzing is. You might be asked to evaluate. What does that mean if you're asked to evaluate something? Give your opinion. And kind of like if you're evaluating a movie, remember how they have the thumbs up, thumbs down? It's a judgment call. And when somebody's evaluating a movie, they'll use criteria such as cinematography, the acting, the plot, the dialogue. All of those are criteria that somebody might use to evaluate a movie. If you're evaluating ice skating, you might use the difficulty of the routine, the artistry, and the accuracy, the technical accuracy. So if you're evaluating something that you've read, you might be evaluating it based on to what extent does it actually convince you, and you might look at things like how much support does it give? Does it give sufficient support? That would be one criterion. Another criterion might be, is it clear? Another is it logical, right? Or are there a lot of logical fallacies that sort of destroy the argument that the author's making? Is it complete, or are there aspects of an issue that the author's totally ignored? Right? Those would be things that you might use if you're evaluating an essay. If you're evaluating a solution, does it really work? Does it address the problem? Is it too expensive? Is it something that other people will accept? So if you're asked to evaluate, you have to look at not only what are you evaluating, but on what basis? What criteria are you using? Define. Everybody should know this one. If they ask you to define, what are you supposed to do? Tell what a word. What was that? What it means, yeah. And so that's something that's actually quite common, especially in content area classes. If you're taking psychology, right, you may need to define some terms in your essay. Discuss is a broader term, talk about. Comment is similar to discuss. How do might be part of a question that's asking you to explain a process. Okay. Oops. Compare and contrast is a really common one. What does contrast mean? Yeah. There are two subjects, how do they differ? Or even three subjects or four, right? But at least two subjects, how do they differ? Compare can mean just similarities or similarities and differences, right? If you get an essay question where your teacher asks you to compare two things, and it doesn't say compare and or contrast, I would ask your teacher, do you want similarities only, or do you want similarities and differences? Or can I do differences only? Sometimes teachers really have a specific thing in mind and they don't state it that clearly. I would ask for clarification if you're not sure. And that's true on any of these, by the way. Your teacher is a resource to you. You should ask questions. They can tell you if they're not able to answer, but usually a question like this, they can answer. Explain. It's similar to analyze, similar to how do. Relate usually means take two topics and show how they connect. So maybe you're relating childhood development to your own experiences. That's a possibility, right? Or relating it to observations you've done for the class. That would be important. For the military history, you might be relating two different developments in military that are actually connecting. Maybe one is the cause of the other, or maybe they're simply similar. Relating is a broader term. Apply is a wonderful term as well. It usually means taking a theory or an idea and showing how it works in reality. And so a lot of times we ask you to apply. And that's something that you may do in science, right? Apply the law of gravity, maybe not. Okay. Identify or list tend to mean they're looking for factual knowledge. By the way, these task words are often not in isolation. Often a teacher will use more than one in an essay exam. What are is similar to identify. They're asking you to list or name. So, here we go. So, in the back, those of you who just came in, what's the task in that first example up there? You mean define the term gender stereotype? Yeah, in that, what's the task word? Is it gender stereotype? That would be the topic. Oh. Yeah, that's the topic. That's what you're supposed to write about. What are you supposed to do with gender stereotype? Yeah, and that's your task. Excellent. Okay. So, sorry, I'm picking on you. So defining, we need to make sure that we show the meaning, right? That we give the meaning of it. And gender stereotype is clearly the topic. Now, that's a very simple one, right? Now, if you were doing this and it was a one-paragraph answer, a short answer question, that would make sense. If it were a longer one, you might need to think about giving examples, right? You might need to explain the difference between a gender stereotype and gender, showing how it's different from just gender. So you would need to push it further if it's a full essay. Probably this would be a short answer question instead. This one might be a paragraph, but it could be a short essay. What are Descartes' arguments for the existence of God? How many of you have heard the phrase cogito ergo sum? Anybody heard that? It's a pretty famous quote. Cogito ergo sum means I think. Cogito means I think in Latin. Ergo means therefore. And sum means I am. And Descartes' arguments, this is something you might find in a philosophy class. Okay. So if you're taking philosophy, you might be asked to do this because you may have studied, you may have read Descartes, and they're looking at, do you understand his argument? So what are is asking you to identify the arguments. This tells you that there's going to be multiple layers of argument. It's actually a very complex argument. I don't think I could explain it off the top of my head, but the general idea is Descartes was sitting around one day and said, how do I know that God exists? And he thought, well, I'm going to try to figure out what I can doubt and what I can truly believe without doubting. So he goes back and back and back and back, and he's trying to think, oh, I could doubt that, I could doubt that, I could doubt this, I can doubt this other thing. And he goes, but you know what, I'm thinking. I'm the one thinking about all of this, and so there's an I, there's a me. And since I'm thinking, I know that I exist. Cogito ergo sum. I think, therefore I am. The fact that I'm thinking means that I cannot doubt my own existence, is his argument. Then, so he goes backwards. He tries to figure out everything he can doubt. He gets to the one truth that he cannot doubt. I'm thinking, I exist. And then he traces it all the way back up to proving that God exists. So this is a very, very old argument. And when Nietzsche comes around, he says, I think, therefore I am is wrong. So you'd have to read Nietzsche to figure that one out. But it's a very complex argument. So it may look like a simple question on the surface, but it's actually asking for a lot of information, because you have to look at what does the process of doubting all the way down to the cogito ergo sum, and then you have to work your way back up to how does he say that that proves the existence of God. Okay. So longer essay there. So this one is perfect for you, since are you taking childhood development right now? Oh, you've already taken it. Okay. So Piaget and Erikson both created stages of personality development, and so anybody who's taking childhood development or educational psychology will take a class where you learn this. And I don't remember it, unfortunately, it's been a while. But let me ask you here, what is the task? There's one word. Compare. Now, remember similarities and differences? Probably we're going to look at both, right? That I probably wouldn't even bother to ask the teacher. I would just guess that compare means tell me similarities and differences. But if I wasn't sure, I would ask. There's actually two topics. One is Piaget's stages of personality development. What's the other? Erikson's stages of personality development. Now, if I were doing the pre-writing for this, there's a pretty obvious thing that you can do here, right? You can say Piaget over here, Erikson over here, and then you might go through and just kind of list off the different stages on both sides. And then when you're writing your essay, you might have a paragraph for each, or if there are a couple stages that are related, you might put them together in a paragraph, right? And so it kind of will tell you how many paragraphs you need too. So going through there, I would go right to doing a chart like this, and then I would use that as the basis of my essay as I'm writing. I would keep referring to it. A good idea is to write this on a separate paper, like on maybe on the exam itself, if you're allowed to write on your exam, so that in your blue book you can have your blue book open and you can look at your pre-writing at the same time. So it'll help you stay focused. Okay. I have a longer one, but I think this is such an important skill. That's why I'm sitting on it for a long time, is that I find this is one of the areas where students really have the hardest time, is really getting the questions. So I'm going to read this aloud. Adler and Town argue the following in their article on defense mechanisms. There are times when protecting a private self is desirable. Also, confronting too many unpleasant truths or perceptions of oneself too quickly can be unmanageable. However, your own experience will show that, most often, acting in the following defensive ways can damage your relationships with others. Now, the idea here is that the students already read this article, right? So the student would have to remember what the defense mechanisms are. So if you haven't studied defense mechanisms, this may look a little bit harder. Define 3 classes of defense mechanisms that you have observed in yourself and in others. For each type, explain how the use of that defense mechanism can both serve as a healthy protection for one's private self and result in an unhealthy distortion of one's sense of reality. This is a much more complex question. So I'm going to ask you guys to do a little work here and tell me, what are some of the tasks that you see? Define, yeah, excellent. So we have define as a task. What's another task? Yes, explain the use. And there are 2 parts to that. So if we look at the topics, we have to define 3 defense mechanisms. Do you guys see how that's actually going to be 3 separate subtopics within your paper? And then for each of them, you're explaining the use, and this is going to be 2 separate things as well. What's one use? Or the use can serve in 2 ways. What's one way that defense mechanisms can serve? Healthy protection, yeah. What's the other? Good. So what you're going to do is for each of the 3 classes, you have to, 1, define it, then explain how it's a healthy protection and how it's also unhealthy. It's a distortion of reality. Then you would go on to the second one. So how many body paragraphs do you think this essay might have? Minimum. It could have 11. We could probably make fewer. In paragraph 1, we'd have to pick a defense mechanism, right? And so blame shifting is a common defense mechanism, right? Have you guys heard of that term before, right? He made me do it. Yes, I was a jerk, but only because, you said this to me. And so it's really your fault. I had a friend who once, she was doing a fake punch toward me, and I was holding a plate of food, and I kind of put it up in defense, and so she hit the food into me, and she said, well, it's your fault. If only you had not defended yourself. Okay, that's your fault. So if I were picking blame shifting, the first thing I would want to do is do what? Define it, yeah. So I need to define, and then I need to show how it's healthy. It can be healthy. And then I can show how it can be an unhealthy distortion. Do you guys see how that works? And then paragraph 2, I'd pick another one. Paragraph 3, I'd pick another one. But this is a complex question, so there are at least 3 different things that I need to do in that paragraph. Do you see how having your pre-writing done here would keep you focused during the test? It would help you remember. A lot of times what will happen is, without really reading the question carefully, students might forget to define, or they'll define, but they'll forget to do healthy and unhealthy. It's very easy for that to happen. So I just analyzed this. One topic is the types of defense mechanisms. Defense mechanisms is a healthy protection and is an unhealthy distortion. The tasks are to identify and define, to explain how both. Okay. So let's get into writing the essay itself. We've done all this preparation. And the 4 stages that I have here are: think first, write the essay, think again, and don't panic. Very important. If you're a Douglas Adams fan, you'll like that. Don't panic. If you don't know who Douglas Adams is, he wrote a book called Hitchhiker's Guide to the Galaxy. It says, don't panic. So the first thing is read the directions carefully, and we just went over how to do that. So I spent a lot of time there. Then you want to generate ideas, brainstorming, clustering, a brief outline at least. A scratch outline of what you want to do in each paragraph to keep you focused. That's really the most important part. There's a book that I read a long time ago called The Blue Book, A Student's Guide to Essay Exams. And this is not written for English classes per se. It's actually written for students in content area classes. And so they try to simplify it and say, just make sure you tell, show, and end. Tell the answer to each question. And in English, we know that that's what statement? Your thesis statement. Your thesis should be the overall answer to the essay question. In the one that we just looked at, you would want to say something like, you would want to name the 3 defense mechanisms and state that they can be both helpful and harmful. That would be your thesis. Your reader, your teacher, who is your reader, will know right away that you understand how to answer the question overall. You haven't supported it, you haven't explained your answer yet, but you've answered it. So yes, with an English class, you want to make sure that you have a nice hook leading into a strong thesis statement. regardless of what class you're in, you want to make sure that in that first paragraph, that question is answered. In the body, you're going to show, right? You're going to show that you know the course material well enough to support and explain your answer. And make sure you end. A lot of times people just sort of trail off. They don't really write a conclusion. My mother always told me when I was in high school, she would say, tell them what you're going to tell them. Tell them. Tell them what you told them. You don't want to be overly repetitive, but it's better to really keep honing in your main point. Make sure your teacher really knows what you're trying to say. So, answering the question early on, introduce the topic, answer the question directly. You may briefly list your main points. Different teachers and different textbooks will call this something different, but this can be part of your thesis, the listing of the main points. Some people will call it a thesis map, if you've ever heard that. And other people will call it a forecasting statement. There are a number of different phrases I've heard. The idea is you have your thesis statement, this is your argument. Sometimes within it or the very next sentence is almost an outline of your paper. And that's usually a very helpful thing to do, particularly in essay exams, because you don't want to be overly subtle. You want to make sure your answers just are really, really clear and really direct. Then you support it with detailed examples and explanation. By the way, just giving examples or just giving quotes is not enough. You need to analyze them. You need to explain how they support your point. If you struggle with this, is anybody here in English 1B? 1A? 1A? 50? Okay. 60A, 60B? Okay. 60A, 60B, you're probably not using that many quotes. 50, 1A, 1A, 1B, you're probably using quotations. If you struggle with remembering to say something after the quote to add discussion, a nice trick is to add the phrase, this shows that, afterwards. And it triggers you to write your discussion. It triggers you to remind your reader how this actually supports your point, that you're not just assuming your reader understands what you're trying to say. You know, in regular informal conversations, we can go, oh, you know what I mean. Don't do that in an essay exam. Tell them. From the same book that I quoted earlier, they had a phrase that I thought was pretty funny, and so I wanted to share it with you, which is, good bull plus good information equals good essay exam or good exam essay. A lot of times, I've heard people say this, and I've said it myself, that I'll come out of an exam and I'll have done okay on it, done pretty well, but I'll say, I BS'd my way through that. Have you guys ever at least heard somebody say that? Man, I just BS'd my way through that. I really didn't know the information. Well, I've said that too. What I've come to realize coming from the teacher's perspective is that what we think of as BS typically isn't. What it is we think it's BS when we don't remember a lot of facts, when we don't remember a lot of information, right? That's when we go, oh, I just BS'd my way through that. What a teacher sees is that you get the big picture, right? The good bull is the big picture. That you understood how ideas connect. You just couldn't remember the information that would support it. So maybe you have the forest, not the trees, right? You have the overall map. Some people will call this global thinking. If you have a global thinker gets the big picture, a local thinker gets the minor details. Some students have lots and lots of good detail, good information, but they don't have the big picture. You don't want to choose one or the other. You want both, right? Somebody who has the big picture may do well, but they're going to do better if they have the big picture and the detail. So you want to try to get both of those into your essay. By the way, the big picture is going to come across in your thesis statement, your topic sentences, and your explanations. The detail is going to come across in your examples, your statistics, your facts, the supporting detail. So you want both of those. That's what you should have in an essay. As you're writing, don't lose your focus. That's that whole thing about going to the bathroom and having a sweater, and all of those things are to keep you focused so that you're not distracted by various things. Keep referring back to the outline you've written, because that'll keep your pace going. It'll keep you from going off track because you thought of a really interesting idea that's not really related. And make sure that you bring your writing to a conclusion. Don't forget to end it. As you're writing, some of you love writing in beautiful style. I'm one of those. I love my words to be beautiful. I want my essays to be poetry in essay format, right? But when you're writing an essay exam, it's so important that your primary focus always, and this is true in out-of-class essays too, but your primary focus really, really has to be clarity. If your reader doesn't know what you mean, you've lost them. If your teacher doesn't know what you're trying to say, you've failed to communicate your own knowledge and your own understanding. The nice thing with out-of-class essays is you can afford the time to be more flowery and still make sure that you're clear. The problem with in-class writing is you don't have all that time to revise. You don't have that time to have other people read and say, I don't know what you mean here. So your first concern should always be content and clarity. What are you saying, and is it clear? One of my students said that her grandfather would tell her, kiss your paper. And she's like, No, he's like, it means keep it simple, stupid. So my other suggestion, and I think this is one of the best suggestions, I hope you can come away and that you try this, is write legibly. That's important, that you read it, that your teacher can read it, right, on one side of the page only. If you have that blue book and the other side you keep blank, then you have an extra use for it later on. Obviously, it depends on the format, but if you're writing in a blue book, this is great. Also leave the margins clear. Leave a margin on the right and the left typically, so that there's room for the teacher to comment, but also so that there's room for you to add something in if you need to add something in. Okay. So I wanted to give you an example of why this is so important. So pretend that this is a blue book, okay? This is one side of the page, this is the other side, okay? Now, this is the back side of another page, right? It would be lined paper. Well, what I would encourage you to do is, as you're writing, you will often feel like something's not right. Maybe you're not sure about the spelling, right? Maybe the sentence just sounds funny to you, but you don't want to stop because you don't want to lose your momentum. You don't want to forget your ideas. And so you don't want to stop and try to correct it right then. So what I tell students to do is to make little stars or little marks in the margin, something not huge, but some little mark that you will see if you go back through your paper at the end. And that's going to be that 5 to 10 minutes you have to edit at the end. And so at the end, you can go, ooh, haha, wrong there. And you can do a little star all the way over here and have the correct spelling. This one, maybe I didn't like the sentence. This oversimplified answer is not entirely incorrect. Huh? What does that mean? That's kind of confusing. Okay, I'm going to rewrite that sentence. So now I have a little arrow. You could do a little caret too. You can make the arrow go this way. It doesn't matter. So now I've written, while this answer is not entirely incorrect, it is oversimplified. I think that sounds clearer. Maybe I'm reading and I realize I forgot a really important point. I go, oh, I forgot to say this. I missed a point that I was going to include, or that I should have included. So I wrote, thus, the Civil War was caused by tensions over the economic strength of the South and over federal versus state power. And then I realized, oh, I want to explain that this is the reason more than slavery. Okay, so I'm going to add that idea over on the other side because now I have room to do it. I have space. I don't have to do the weird margins where you write upside down and sideways and all the way around. I have the room to do it over there. So this does two things. One, it helps you to keep your pace while you're writing. Because you're just writing, and anytime something sounds funny, you make a little mark. You don't think about how to correct it, you just keep going. So the pacing is much better. The other thing is it helps you to do the editing because now you know that you have these little marks that you can go back to right away. And you go, okay, I'm looking for my little marks. And I'm going to fix all of those first. Now, if you have more time, I would encourage you to read again. And when you read a second time, after you've fixed all the things you knew were problems as you were writing, then you want to look for 1, 2, or 3 top problems that you tend to have in your writing. So I do want you guys to raise your hands. I know it's a novel idea. But if you have problems with spelling, raise your hands. Okay. So you may go through ones where you're only looking for spelling errors, nothing else. How many of you have trouble with run-ons? Not a single one in this classroom? I'm going to talk to your teachers. Okay, fragments? Yeah. What about verb forms? Maybe you have trouble with verbs? Okay. What problems do you have in your writing sometimes?
Lack of ideas.
What's that?
Lack of ideas.
Lack of ideas? Well, and then that would be the thing that you'd want to look for, right? Is that you would go through, and it doesn't have to just be grammatical. I should point that out. This is not just grammatical. I'm adding ideas, right? What you might want to do is go, okay, I'm getting pushed by my teacher because I don't push my ideas far enough. I don't dig deeply enough. So I'm going to read and look for where I can push my thinking further, where I can add analysis, where I can explain my ideas in greater detail. And then you'll really need this because you might be writing several sentences over on this side, right? And so having that whole page is going to be helpful. Any other things that you tend to get docked for in your out-of-class essays? Punctuation. Yeah, and then that's what you would look for, right? So after you've gone through and you found all the places where you've made little stars or asterisks, you're going to go through and just look for punctuation. I'm going to check all of my punctuation in this. The idea is that you're targeting the things that are your issues, and you're focused. The metaphor that I usually use for this is that if you're playing paintball and you're not aiming, you're not going to hit as many people, right? But if you're aiming specifically at that one, like your best friend, you're like, I'm going to get my best friend. And you're citing them, right? You're focused on them. You're hopefully not ignoring other things completely, but you really are focused on that person. You take them out, and then you can move on to something else. But you're less likely to find error in your writing if you're just looking generally without any sense of what you're looking for. You want to hunt down the comma. You want to hunt down those misspelled words. You want to know what it is you're looking for as you're reading. Otherwise, what you'll read is just the paper in your head, right? Or you'll just kind of flow through all of the text without finding many errors. It's much better when you have a sense of what you're looking for. Okay. One other point I want to make about this technique, and one of the reasons I think it's so useful, is you can actually work on your organization this way too. If you're reading and you realize, I really this was not as well organized as I thought, you can, mark off where you want things, write a number 1, write 2. I've had students do that occasionally where they tell me, no, I really want it this way. And usually they're right. Usually it's an improvement. So I'll just follow their numbering system. I've even had weird ones where it says, like it crosses it off and it says, intro is on the last page, so I flip to the last page, I read number 1, and they just numbered all of the paragraphs, or they numbered sentences within a paragraph, so I'm reading, following the numbers, but it's often better. And so they get credit for realizing that and fixing it as best as they can in the context of an essay exam. And that's fine too. The other is if you have to cross something out. Now here I didn't cross it out, right? But I would cross it out with just one single line. Every once in a while I see students who, they misspell a word. They go, ooh, I don't want to say explain. And they go, and it's like there's a hole in the page. I don't want you to know how I spelled it before. That's just silly. Just draw a nice line through it. We'll read what you've written, okay? It's not necessary to hide all traces of the wrong word. Okay. So some of this is what we already said. Put a small marker check in the margin for possible errors. Check your errors when you're done, not during. Keep an eye out for your own patterns of error, whether that's maybe you need to add ideas, maybe you need to check punctuation, maybe it's spelling. Reread for any possible changes or additions. Maybe you want to add detail, add support that you forgot about. That's the think again part. As you're writing, don't panic. Don't. Okay. If you don't know everything, start writing. If you're not sure exactly what you're going to say in every paragraph and that 5-10 minutes has gone by, just begin. You can use organizational cues like in the first place. It may not be the strongest, but it's there, right? It helps your reader follow. If you need to stray from your outline, you can add the material on the reverse side of the page like I was showing you. If you need to, come up for air, breathe. Look away from your essay for a second, especially if you start finding yourself getting anxious. Put the exam in perspective and then continue. Some teachers will not let you go for a bathroom break, some will. It depends on your instructor. But there's nothing to stop you from looking away from your exam and looking up for a little bit. I'm going to show you guys something. Lift your hands. Humor me. And go like this. Okay. I have a friend who taught 2nd grade and now teaches 5th grade, and she was taught that that's something they should tell students to do when they're getting anxious, that it sort of is relaxing, but it doesn't disturb other people as much. They just kind of, you're stretching, you look away. It gets you out of the exam for a moment. It helps you move. Movement helps, right? Your blood starts flowing again. You're breathing more clearly. And actually, when you do this, you do breathe more clearly. Right? If you ever have trouble breathing, putting your arms up actually opens your lungs. Do something to help you relieve some of that stress and then move on. I do want to have a quick note on online timed writing. Have any of you taken an online class before? Anybody done it? Okay, 1 or 2. And some of you may be taking timed writing online. It's a little bit different. One really important thing is, well, hopefully have really good internet connection. Okay. I would always suggest that you open up a word processing program and type your essay there. Because if something happens to the course website, you want to be able to continue writing your essay and submit it later. Then you paste it into the course website when you're finished. Since you can't really do the little marks in the margin when you're typing, what you can do is use a highlight feature and mark the areas that you're going to check during the proofreading. Typically during an in-class or a timed writing for an online class, they recognize that you have spell check and other things like that. They may tell you whether or not you can use it. But you can certainly highlight those sentences that sound funny to you, right? And then go back to them. And that's it. So are there any questions? Okay. Well, if you go ahead and if you've written the 3 things you've learned, I can sign your confirmation sheet. And that's it.